So yeah, we've done the welcome and introduction. We added an item yesterday to the agenda based on my discussions with Director Tierney. Just an open opportunity for CAC member questions and discussion and answer by staff. Again, we'll try to provide you every answer that we can in this forum. We may have to respond back to you, though, if we don't have the answers on hand. Following that is staff reports. We've got a verbal report on operations and maintenance activities for the service, a capital works update. I'll provide a brief verbal update on the Creston Alternative Water Supply Study. And then Uli will talk to the Aero Environmental Services fee. Following that, we'll just briefly review the approved 2024 to 2028 financial plan, and then we will look at the draft 5-year plan for 2025 to 2029. Yeah, with that, I know that we had some questions. I know, Margaret, you had posed some questions. You're welcome to start posing them now. Oh, we've got a walk-in as well. Hi, welcome.
Hi, Matilda.
Good, how are you?
Good, thank you. Got an agenda for you right here.
Yeah, welcome, Matilda.
Oh, and slightly larger print.
Yes, yeah. The draft budget is a 3-pager. So you can
Printed it as a 12-page.
yes.
And our meeting guy, yeah, we just got around the table and introduced
Okay.
ourselves.
I'm Chris, I'm the manager. We've got 2 other RD staff here.
I'm Tilly,
Tilly, nice to
or
meet
Matilda. Hi, Margaret.
Hi.
So we're just on the second agenda item, which is an open discussion with CAC members. Yeah, we'll start with Margaret because you posed questions kind of most recently, Margaret.
Thank you. So my concern, first of all, has to do with our experience in the community of this system that we're trying to maintain and consider budgets for as being extremely expensive, and it appears to be unwieldy because I can see it escalating and escalating and escalating in what it's going to cost us as ratepayers. So my discussion through Roger was my concern about how to bring my concerns forward, because coming to a meeting such as this, we're talking to administrators. We're not necessarily talking to decision makers, the ones that will help us decide if we want to change direction. I know you have considered some changes, supply management of water for farmers, and that's coming up a little bit later. But if I were to put it into a short version of where I see myself in this as a ratepayer, I see myself as currently paying mostly for hardware, not for water. And so my water rates reflect the hardware that we keep on trying to put forward to bring the water to us, whether it's pipelines or filters or upgrades with pressure, etc. That, in my mind, equates with a fixed rate. So I don't have a whole lot of ability as a farmer to reduce my water rates when I have a year like we had last year with no crops. And that's concerning, because I see now it looks like my rates will go up another $1,000 this year. So those are my concerns. Now, I suggested perhaps what we needed to do is establish for our committee members, for our community, a way of having a voice towards issues like this or problems like this, and establishing a pathway for alternatives that we could consider. It's really difficult for you to consider all that on the administrative side unless you're given that directive. And I also would like a commitment to somehow look to the future towards reducing our water expenses or our water rate expenses. And one last thing I'd like to see is representation from our committee or our community on an ongoing basis among the decision makers who may decide, okay, let's make some changes to this system. We need to have a voice there. As far as I understand, our decision makers are a group of directors who are not necessarily directly involved with the system and who don't feel it when rates change the way we do. So I think to help them make decisions, to help us, we need to have a voice there. And I think that's it, if you've caught that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Chris, clarifying question?
Yes.
Yes, Kelly Bad, we're talking or responding, clarifying question. What, can you give me an example of what this voice would look like in terms of the decision makers that would solve what you have in mind? Would be very helpful, because just saying that you need a voice is, I understand that, but is that voice, give me an example of what that voice looks like, please. Thank you.
Well, not being involved in the decision making, I have no idea what it looks like when you're making the decision. So part of that is being present to the decision making process in a way where we can then make comment, be there for reference if you want to ask, what do you think this would do if? That was my idea. Now, I have never sat in on any of these decision making meetings. And I don't know who else in our group might have. I don't know if Dawn has. I'm relatively new to the process compared to past. I think we've had committee members somewhere in the back maybe have participated. I'm not sure.
Very good questions. Chris and Uli, can you respond to that by outlining part of the public's ability to input into these budgets?
I'm happy to. I'm happy to. So, first of all, the structure is throughout all regional district services essentially the same. The services and the associated assets are owned by the regional district, and the direction, the final direction on almost all decision is coming from a board of directors, 20 directors overall, that make the decisions. Recommendations for the decisions come from various bodies. We have various commissions and committees. Most lately, the structure has mildly changed here, converting it from a commission to a committee. For us as staff, we don't feel anything essentially changed from the past practices. So that brings us to this committee. You have your two directors as part of the committee. They are supporting or not supporting decisions, or not decisions, recommendations coming from this advisory committee. You have some long-standing members here in form of Elizabeth and Dawn that have been for many years on this committee and can probably speak to their feel and taste in regards to input and in how far input is or has been considered in the decision making. The actual decision making that's established in legislation has to come from the board and cannot, for the largest part, cannot be sublet to a committee. All committees within and commissions within the regional district have, if any, very limited delegated powers. So the board generally is the final decision making on almost all decisions. Having said that, we have throughout attempted to have detailed discourse with this group. The last couple of years, this has been halted in part because we didn't have all members in place. But generally speaking, over the last 15 years or 15 and a half years that I'm dealing with that, we had fairly detailed discussions with this committee in regards to appropriate approaches. But I think I would, if that's okay with you, go a little bit back in history. Yes, you have seen significant cost increases, no doubt about it. But I'm assuming you are a longer member of the community, and I'm assuming you have received some of the information about the cost drivers. So starting point, going back 15 years ago, you had a service with relatively low rates, but they were far from sustainable. You had a service that did have no reserves, or not no reserves, but very low reserves. You had a very aged system. You were in many ways in a critical stage. So the focus for the first 5 to 10 years was to secure water supply in the sense of replacing 11 kilometers of main line. Your main line is a 600 millimeters, so 2 feet large line that comes 11 kilometers down from your treatment plant at Arrow Creek down to your community and supplies as well the town of Creston. That line was well over 90 years old, was in a state of neglect, had leakage. In some years, we lost a quarter of our highly treated water through a leaky line, and we managed, with the help of grants and rate increases, to replace that line in a span of 5, 6, 7 years. The other one was the treatment plant itself. Initially, there were no significant maintenance costs, but that plant is meanwhile 20 years old. We had to account for very expensive filtration, and you mentioned that in your email to us, a very expensive filtration cost, along the filter replacement on an annualized basis cost us right now about $350,000 a year. You speak to looking for other solutions. You refer to staff here being just administrators. You're right, we are not the decision makers, but you have the technical staff here that very much considers the appropriate and best approach to this. With support and direction from the directors and the board, we have entered into, and with support from the town of Creston, we have entered into a filtration study to determine if there is other options for us to deliver water that meets the criteria set out by Interior Health that we are bound by. The filtration study will look as well, and that is very much driven from staff side, at options for discussion with Interior Health, if and to what level filtration is actually required. So there's efforts that are being done on staffing level, and with in part direction from the board and your local directors, to investigate what we can do in regards to a alternative to the very expensive filtration that you have. And we very much recognize that a lot of that water ends up in the agricultural sector and does not necessarily require the level of treatment that you're seeing. We have as well, that is not just driven by the Erickson water system, but the general situation of water in the Roger Creston Valley. We have entered into a study, again, fully funded by grants, 75% by an agricultural grant, and 25% by community works funds that have been supplied through your directors that are community works that funds that were assigned to their electoral areas. So that study is as well underway. We have the filtration study, we have the alternative water supply study. We have managed with the increases to come for the for your treatment system, what we generally call Arrow Creek Water Treatment Service, to a long-term sustainable level, meaning we contribute, we fully pay our operational costs and contribute enough to reserves for the long-term replacement of infrastructure at that plant. So that's a little bit the history about the past drivers of rate increases that you have seen. Going forward, and part of the last couple of years of increases is to recognize that you have a system, a distribution system that is extremely outdated. And you make reference to saying you're paying, all your money is going towards hardware, and that's correct. But let's recognize without that hardware, you do not have water where you need it. If we let your distribution system go to the level as we have the main line from the treatment plant, you not only will have water outages, a lack of water in certain areas, agricultural losses, you will as well have a vastly increased cost because your cost portion to pay for Arrow Creek in comparison to what the town of Creston pays is very much dependent on how much, on a percentage basis, how much water you take from what's produced up at that plant. So, to your distribution system, you have a distribution system that has a lot of old, close to end-of-life pipe. I'm specifically referring to your asbestos cement pipe. I believe the last number I heard was 20 kilometers, 20,000 meters, 60,000 feet of asbestos pipe that is at end of life. And with asbestos pipe, you don't get a whole lot of pre-warning like with a steel pipe or a plastic pipe, where you say, oh, if I start to get increased leakage, I put a clamp on and I can live through for a few years until I have the money to replace it. Asbestos pipe, once it starts failing, it loses structural integrity. When you try to put a clamp on, you just fold that pipe and you end up having to right there replace sections of pipe. The further problem with asbestos pipe is long-term liability. If you leave the asbestos pipe in the ground, you will cause a significant liability of future cost to future generations. Therefore, the board in foresight has approved a policy that was put before them by staff to where economically feasible to remove the asbestos pipe in order to reduce future liability. So that's an added cost as well. So much for your current state and your current financial needs. And pass back to the chair.
Uli, I've got a question here from Matilda.
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 I understand absolutely that the pipe is older, and as you say, near end of life. However, I also understand from talking to other people that the pipe itself, when they've dug it up, is actually in fairly good condition due to the soil that we have, the types of soil that a lot of this pipe is running through. Would it not be more economical to replace sections that need it as needed, as opposed to having a $45 million loan that we have to take out?
So, in that regard, we are, sorry, Chair, should I answer this?
Yeah, I can start answering it as well.
Go ahead.
typically you're going to spend quite a bit less to plan out capital projects. We've got an asset management plan that's got every asset in the system, every length of pipe, its material, what we understand its condition to be in, its break history, and an assumed end of life. It will be typically much cheaper for us to plan out capital projects based on those needs, prioritize needs from your asset management plan, than to have an emergency situation, you got breakage or leakage or service disruption or all of that, and then respond to it at that time. Responding to things as they break is going to typically cost the system users much more.
In the long run.
In the long run, yeah.
However, when we're being told, as we were last December, that this is going to be a $45 million project, that there wasn't the prospect of grants, and that there are about 700 users who are going to have to pay for this. I think that this is going to have a huge effect on Erickson and having a lot of people leave Erickson.
Maybe I'll hand that response over to you, Uli.
Because it's a scary number. I mean, people are going, what do you mean 45 million? Well, it was 35 million plus the 10 million in order to dispose of the pipeline. So and there's 700 users. It's not rocket science to realize that it's not just us going to be paying, but our children and our grandchildren. This is huge. That's why, would it be something that, yes, in the long run, it may end up costing more. However, it's in chunk sizes that we could digest a whole lot easier if we do it on an as-needed basis.
So, just a question of this $45 million figure, I'm not familiar with
That came in
And I'm not
last year.
familiar with it.
That's what we had last year. That's the figure we were given on the 4th of December last year. And I have that. It was 35 million plus the 10 million in order to reduce.
2023, are you talking?
Well, in 2023, the last time we had a meeting.
Yeah, so a year
It
and
wasn't
something
this
ago.
past December, it was the December before.
So that may have been a figure if you were looking at the asbestos pipe problem on a one-off basis, right? Which is what he's saying is not the way they're doing it. They're trying to look at the assets as a whole.
It was 42 million now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Am I
we
correct?
look at the assets as a whole and prioritize our capital works based on need, based on assumed need from the asset management plan, based on all the information dumped into it.
Because I see for this year, that line is actually left blank. It's got a hashtag ref mention. Model pipe replacement values excluding asbestos pipe removal. That's not shown.
Oh.
It has the asbestos pipe removal of 10 million.
It is. I don't know if I'm looking at the.
That's the number that people have been, when I've talked to a number of agricultural people that have been saying that is going to scare a lot of Erickson residents away.
While you're confirming that, if I may go back to the previous
10 million,
lady.
10,180,000.
That's the,
Who's your question was, Uli has spent some time to generate some context around your question, but you were not asked if you had anything further based on that response from Uli. I just wanted to not ignore you and just get back to you to ask, is there anything further around that question? And I don't remember.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so it was referred to an agreement with the town of Creston, had some agreement about percentage of water taken. And I was wondering how you establish the volume of water that Creston is using as opposed to Erickson. And then I think I'm having some clarification on who carries the load of that debt over asbestos pipe. It sounds like it's Erickson residents. So I guess it circles back for me to whether or not farmers on any given year when they are not using as much water, do they get a rebate or do they get a release from the high rates that we pay when we're not using the volume of water. And I don't know if last year was a good example of how you could establish that, because last year there weren't very many farmers that were able to produce the kind of fruit that we used to produce just because of the weather. So those are kind of convoluted, but I'm wondering about how we get assessed for the volume of water that we use as opposed to the volume that the town of Creston uses.
If you want to, I can answer that.
Sure, thank you.
So we have various meters. We have meters for water leaving our plant at Arrow Creek. We have meters at our reservoir just above your community. We have, or the town of Creston has, a meter at the reservoir where they receive the volumes coming and supplied from Arrow Creek. So we can, based on these meters, and there's a couple more meters that we have, but based on these meters, we can determine very closely what the distribution of water usage is. We know what's used in the area before the reservoirs. We know what's going into the town of Creston, and we know what leaves our reservoirs. And based on that, we can calculate the percentage that is used with a couple of minor assumptions in the Erickson area. That calculation was discussed severely at the time when the agreement with the town was struck, and was what ultimately was settled on how to determine the distribution of cost between the two parties.
So Lily, just
Go ahead.
a question. Just for last summer, was the irrigation use down considerably?
I was actually just looking that up, but I think it's not more than a percent or two difference. But Alex, can you look that up?
Yeah.
We look that up and get back to you here in a minute.
Okay, so is it okay if I make a comment?
Yes.
Lily, I think you gave a great summary of kind of the issues that we've had in the past, how we got here. I'm just, overall, and Margot, we're responsible in the Erickson system for paying the costs of the Erickson system. So there's no reasonable expectation that the town should help us pay for asbestos pipe replacement in Erickson. We're paying the price for years and years of not paying the price. For years and years, we had the cheapest water rates, some of the cheapest water rates in BC, 20, 30 bucks an acre. And that's a result of leadership at that time. For a long time was Alvin Azuka as the chair, not charging what they should have been to establish a reserve and to pay for pipe replacement on a timely basis. So that's part of the reason, that's a big part of the reason that we have this problem now. It's always you pay now or you pay later. Now is later for that system. So we're paying for it. I wanted to make a couple of observations on the way our commission worked versus the committee. The commission, it seemed to have a little bit different mandate in a sense, still the mandate to meet with staff and politicians and to discuss issues in the system. But at that point, at that time, we would sometimes vote on, the commission would vote, make motions and vote on those motions as to how we might proceed. But it was always recognized that it was only a recommendation to the board of directors. And we actually voted at times to increase rates that our two board members, or maybe at the time it might have just been one, did not agree, or for political reasons, did not agree with. They didn't want to raise the rates as much as as our commission thought they should have been raised to try and recognize some of these increasing costs we had. So that's what I see as the difference between the commission and committee now. We also, I think, Uli, you can correct me, but I think we met a little more often And I think that's helpful. I recognize that's more work for you, for staff. But, you know, I think we usually met at least twice a year, sometimes 3 times a year. And I think that that's probably more helpful to feel like we're, you know, part of the process. So
And Don, if I may ask, I would suggest we return to a minimum of a 2 times a year meeting schedule. You are a larger system. You have significant challenges and development, maybe from alternative water sources, from Arrow Creek, or the larger discussion about who pays for what. I think it would be definitely advisable to meet at least twice a year with this group.
yeah, that gives us the impression that we are part of the process. And we don't, you know, in the last meeting we had was December 2023, and then now we're in 2025. That's a big gap.
That's a big gap. Yeah.
So can we go back to,
Silly.
so did you find the information?
It is, yes, I did, sort of that number, that is in the asbestos, placement, on the bottom. The total estimated asbestos pipe removal cost, is $10,189.
Not that one, the one right above it. Model pipe replacement value
Excluding
asbestos pipe.
$21,475,000.
$175,000.
I'm going to plead ignorance on this. What exactly is our deal with the town of Preston? Like, I've been led to believe that in exchange for water, we have fire protection services. No. So is this a pay-per-use flat rate? If they go over so many gallons on the meter, could they pay extra?
It's based on metered, the metered split, so volumetric usage.
Is it averaged over 3 years or something?
Without the year previous being considered, so.
And then every 3 years they look at the proportion.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just proportionate use to run that back. Okay, that's
Is it about 40%?
Yeah, something like that, 37, 63, 40, 60. I think it's changed a little bit.
Yeah, we can see over that Erickson, maybe how it's, over the last few years, yeah.
Like, I don't think we can continue to look at the mistakes that Alba made and that. We have to look towards the future, and there's going to be a big cost. That's it. And the longer we put this off, the more it's going to cost, because pipe is not going to be any cheaper next year.
Yep.
And the year after that, it's going to be more and more.
But if we say we're gonna have to pay now is less, it's $10,000 less. 42, if it's 32. So if we're saying 700 users in Erickson have to pay $32 million, you can bet there's a lot of people that say, well, fine, this is gonna be a deal breaker. So there's gonna be people that end up coming into the Erickson community because of that. Water is gonna be a major issue.
I recognize that as an orchardist. It may lower my land value, but we don't have a choice.
I get that, but is there, because the last time we had this discussion, my understanding is we were clearly told there's no possibilities of grants, which I find is a little ridiculous. Is there not any way that we could have assistance from a governmental?
I think they're looking for grants all the time.
Yes, we are looking for grants all the time, and this is a discussion that we have at every CAC meeting for every other water system as well. There is a dearth of grants for linear infrastructure replacement. I put it this way, it's tough to do ribbon cutting on a big ground. And I think that's how the higher levels see this as a funding perspective. That said, there are occasional grants that come out. Kelowna recently received $70 or $80 million in grants to consolidate a number of irrigation districts, water systems, and provide a separate agricultural water supply to a large area. Again, those opportunities are few and far between, but as staff, we're a little more involved, and we will jump on them if they
And
are
the trick is to be ready.
Yeah. And I think we are ready. We have a mature asset management program going on. We've got professional staff. We've shown we know how to manage water systems. Again, there's challenges in all of these water systems, regards to rate increases to be able to just things maintain that are in the ground, replace things as needed. But
So no one has ever said this doesn't qualify for grants.
No, for the last time, it was said it's very unlikely to ever get a grant.
Unlikely.
again, things look better though. I mean, Alex will speak to the metering code. Having meters, whether district meters or universal meters in your system, raise your, are looked on more positive. By the grants provided.
With the exception of the fact, it's very clear, the water costs this much. We have this many people that can pay. If you have a meter, that's fine. The rate of what you're actually paying is not going to change much because there's still only this many people to pay that much cost.
Yes,
So the cost of the water is gonna change so that it always amounts to about the same. So having a meter.
I'm saying that the higher levels of government look at metered systems more favor. That you're managing your system more. It looks like you're managing your system, and you are managing your system more responsibly. You're better able to assess losses in the system, and then meters also help encourage water conservation. So again, those higher levels of government will look at a system like that versus a system that maybe is pushed against meters, and maybe provide a grant to those systems with meters. So
We have a grant for meters, right?
we do have a grant. Yes, we do.
I have a question about the meters then, and it may be coming up into the next part of your presentation here. But as far as being a farmer, I was at one of your meetings earlier in the spring, and it was decided that there would be metering of larger farm or orchards. And I think there was something like $700-something thousand towards that. So I expected to see something of that happening this summer, and I didn't see it. I don't know what happened. I wondered where that went. That's probably coming up in your presentation later, I hope.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I'll be speaking to that as part of the capital projects, and I can give you updates on that.
Thank you.
Yes.
And briefly, maybe to the volumes for 2024 use in Erickson. In effect, the volumes in Erickson were higher in 24 than they were in 23. So if some farmers may not have used their volumes, the overall consumption did not go down, not measurably.
Could that be an indication newly of leakage?
Sorry, what was the question?
I believe leakage. Leakage is part of the picture, but likely not the essential one. We know that the winter consumption is at the same level as historically, so that gives us an impression about the in-house use. What we do not know is when the summer months come and it goes into irrigation systems, in how far and how much of that is leakage through irrigation systems. That we do not know, and that's where meters play an essential role to determine that.
I'm sure there's leakage, but I've lived here my whole life. There's way more orchard than there has been in decades, which I know it was all orchard. But what I see is a lot of responsible farmers with irrigation, but I've also seen a lot of irresponsible. It's not leakage. They are just blatantly wasting water. When you drive by a fruit stand in the middle of the day and they have sprinklers going on in their parking lots, that's wasteful. That's no question for me.
And
So-
if I may, Chair, we haven't been able to quantify, and that will help us somewhat with that, quantify how much is actually residential irrigation on large lawns and things like that. By knowing how much the agricultural sector knows and how much the consumption goes up in the summer, we have a better indication if smaller or residential users are a significant portion of that. Understanding where the water goes helps us with reducing the ineffective use of it, but as well determining if we have a overall fair rate system in place.
So, Chris, can I suggest that this is an important piece, this members' question discussion?
Yep.
But I would think that I would suggest that it ought to be after the staff reports. Because I'm thinking that a lot of these questions are getting into what's going to be tabled with the staff reports.
Yeah.
And in terms of efficiency, in terms of the questions and everybody's time, if we could move that to after item 3,
Sure.
have those reports and then re-invite people in for discussion. I think it might be a little bit.
Better use of time. I agree.
That's a great suggestion. While we're talking about this, though, I just wanted to make the point that the meters that were put in or are being put in was a large 750,000 approximately that the regional district put into from their community works funds, not from Area B community works funds, and is not subject to being paid for through taxation. So $750,000 was put in for the meters to help identify leakage. That's my understanding. Sorry, I just wanted to interject that while we were talking about meters.
That was my understanding as well.
Yeah. If I may add, there's actually 2 other smaller grants that assist with that program. One from Ministry of Agriculture and one from what we call Growing Community Funds. So there's in total 3 grants that pay in full for that project.
Yeah, thank you, and I agree with Kelly that should take a chance. Yeah, we present. We'll come back to questions.
There we go. With that said, we'll move on to the next item, an operations and maintenance update.
Yeah, so I'm just scanning through the updates that we provide to the Water Services Committee that I can pull from the past for 2024. So we did repair about a handful of gate valves on the main line that needed to be replaced or repaired. There were 2 water main leaks that were addressed in 2024. Of course, a number of meter pits were installed on agricultural properties as part of the phase 1 metering project, and several service lines that had either been broken or needed repair, or new installations were completed as well. And of course, we have just the annual operation and maintenance procedures of flushing, valve exercising, and hydrant inspections. So those had been completed in 2024. I'll move into the capital project because I know this is, we were discussing about the meters. So yes, the metering project for phase 1, some were installed in 2024. Some are currently being installed right now as we speak. We have installations being completed, and the remainder large portion of the project will be completed in the spring of this year. The reason the delay occurred is because there still is supply chain issues with components of the project, specifically the meter pits. So there are long lead times. We're still waiting for some of these components. So that is why this wasn't fully carried out in 2024.
All materials have been purchased.
All materials have been purchased. We do have still some meter pits outstanding and some that need to be replaced for quality issues, quality control issues. So we do anticipate though that this phase 1 metering project, which includes ICI, which is industrial, commercial, and institutional buildings, plus agricultural land with greater than 5 acres of irrigation privilege, not just acreage, but irrigation privilege, those properties will be metered as part of phase 1. Before I move on to any the other capital projects that are taking place, I'm happy to answer any questions on the metering.
Just one, Chris. Of the 1,000 that you installed, how many do you have? What is the total balance in phase 1?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
You said you have 1,000 installed. What is how many, did I hear correctly? How many meters have you installed? How many will be installed in phase 1?
So for phase 1, we have anticipated 146 meters.
And have installed how many?
And we have installed, so our intention is to install, this first portion is to replace the meters that are installed because they are at end of life and they are not in the correct meter pits that are required for phase 1. So that is about a number of, I think it's about 36. So we anticipate to have 36 meters and meter pits installed prior to phase 1. The main part of the project commencing in this spring. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
My question is, once they've been installed, is there any way to assess the volumes of water that are being used according to farm or industrial or whatever? Because I know I keep talking about how farms use so much water, but I can't quite imagine us using more than many of the other things that are going on in the valley, since
Right,
we
so-
only have ours turned on about 4 months of the year.
So, yes, the short answer is yes.
Okay.
With this metering project comes the AMI platform. So this, each meter has an endpoint that collects the data, and then we are able to see that through a platform. So we can, in real time almost, to the 15-minute interval, see what water is being used. And Uli did touch on this. This is an excellent way for farmers and others to determine if they have leakage on their irrigation lines, because we can see exactly when that high water usage is taking place.
And if I may add to this comment made about we are only using 3-4 months of the year water as agricultural sector, that is correct. That is only 5 months or so. But the peak months, in the peak months, the Erickson system uses 10 times as much as in the winter months. Mm-hmm. So that peak is substantial. In the summer months, the Erickson system uses substantially more than all of town of Creston. And so that contributes to the summer consumption. And I'm not saying this is only agricultural sector, but the summer consumption pushes the overall consumption in regards to what comes from the Arrow Creek treatment plant to the 46 to 47% level. Correct.
Good. We can have educated talks about what we're doing now.
Is there any more questions on the metering side of capital projects? Okay. Let me just open. Okay, for 2025, we do also have some linear infrastructure projects, which is water main replacement. The Erickson Road water main replacement design was completed in 2024 and construction will commence in 2025. This section is critical because it's a high pressure pipe that has a breakage history and known leakage. So this section of main is critical for replacement. Along with that, we will begin the design of another linear infrastructure replacement project this year, and that will be taking, it is a section of the distribution system along Highway 3 and 38th Ave, I believe, and it does involve relocating the water main off of private property to fall in line with our bylaws, and also to, it is asbestos cement pipe, so it is also to satisfy our AC pipe policy. So yeah, that section of water mains will, what we can remove for the AC pipe will be removed as well.
And Alex touched with that on a significant issue that makes the situation somewhat worse for us. And you're not the only system, but portions of your system, significant portions of your distribution system is on private land. And many of these lines do not have statutory right-of-way or easements in place. So when we enter there for a replacement of these lines, it requires significant pre-work communication with the landowners and agreements put in place prior to being able to replace these lines. And if we get to the situation where landowners refuse to provide a statutory right-of-way, we will be forced to look for different alignments. So this is a struggle that we have too. Where we have these lines on private side, sometimes going cross field, and the farmers are rightfully taking the water right from these lines in the middle of their field. If we are forced to relocate these lines, and we have added cost both for us as a system to put it on public land, plus for the farmers to now reconnect back to the roadside for their farm. So that's one we still need to tackle in the future, but it's one big issue.
Question on that, is that still considered mainly an Erickson community issue, or is that something that comes with other government funding attached?
So you mean that line replacement?
Yeah, no, realigning the line so that it's in a public as opposed to private.
The water system is owned by the regional district and its regional districts, and with that, the ratepayers in that system's responsibility to replace these lines. We will continue to pursue grants, and we had significant interest from the Ministry of Agriculture in the last couple of years working with us. They have provided, as I mentioned earlier, grants for on the metering side. They have provided grants for the alternative water study and hopefully continue to work with us. But we will continue to pursue federal or provincial grants for these things. But we need to recognize Erickson in the form of Arrow Creek has received significant grants. We have 18 systems overall in the regional district. On most of these systems have not seen any grants, and then Community Works maybe have not seen any federal or provincial grants. So there's a competitive situation in regards to accessing grants, even if we are able to secure any. So that's a bit of a challenge.
That question comes out of some situations where if there's a break in the line, if it's on private property, then it's the property owner's responsibility. But if it's in the regional district line, if you know what I mean, then it becomes like the regional district's responsibility, if you know what I mean. And that's where I was coming from. It's like, okay.
I can certainly answer that. We're talking about main lines, so large
Right.
lines that are simply on private property that we don't have an easement for, or set right away. So yeah, those are ours. Your own service, your small service line is your responsibility as a home. So our goal is to get any of these distribution lines that are, system owned off private property. But yeah, they are solely RDCK owned and our responsibility to.
So being RDCK owned, there's still Erickson community responsibility to have it paid for, to pay for those kinds of adjustments.
It's part of the system. We just want it off private property. It was historically on private property and didn't have a statutory right of way, so we're making it right.
Okay, well, I understand. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Don.
So just a question about the Erickson Road line replacement. Is that, what portion of Erickson Road does that cover?
Oh, that's the one towards, I guess if you know landmarks, it'd be like the Morris's Flower, Scotty RV, that area.
Okay, so it's not the whole Erickson Road.
No, it'll be the section just after the tracks. Heading down toward the highway.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. Does the town of Creston residents pay into the capital reserve fund at all?
I think that's a good question for Chris. That's his section of the budget.
So, it's really all the money that comes in through the, from the service by Town of Creston and Erickson. Portions of that do go to the reserve fund, so they aren't tagged where they come from. So, yeah.
Because in our bills and here in Erickson, it says there's a section like $300 a year to go to the contingency fund. And then there's the agricultural section, and then there's the just using water section. So people have asked me who live in Erickson but have second properties in the town of Creston. They go, why do we have this contingency fund in Erickson, but we don't have that contingency fund in the town of Creston? So you're saying, no, it's because any money we get from the town of Creston, a percentage is taken off to go into capital reserve fund.
Yes, it is.
Okay, and then does that capital reserve fund pay for the filter replacement, or is that part of the operating budget?
So we got a separate service, which is the Arrow Creek Water Treatment Plant, J103, which is dedicated. Yeah, all the vertical assets and also a section of transmission main that is included in that Arrow Creek area. So that's considered separate.
Okay.
Fund for that.
But just to comment, Elizabeth, I don't believe the town pays anything for the Erickson distribution system.
No, they pay for the Arrow Creek.
Yeah, their payment is only for Arrow Creek for that shared service.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I have for capital projects. As Uli had mentioned, outside of Erickson, there's the Arrow Creek capital projects of the filtration study to see the feasibility of optimizing the system so we can use, we can reach the level of regulatory potable water without potentially needing to treat it as much as we are currently. So we're just looking at trying to reduce the costs of that filtration portion of the treatment system.
Chris, I have a question for us.
Yes.
based on that, which you presented, Alex, you mentioned that you're in the design phase on Highway 3 and 38th Avenue, I believe is what you said, not important. But a portion of that is asbestos cement pipe, ACP. Remind the group, or remind me, for the benefit of the group, what the policy is on asbestos cement pipe. The choices are removal and disposal or abandoned in place. Both are have been discussed at the board table. And how much of this, like what length of this, of the 20 kilometers, how much of this are we talking about on the ACP?
Right, I don't have an exact length. This is just in the preliminary stage of looking at what we can do and how we're going to do it, because it does reside on private property without an easement currently, or statutory right-of-way, pardon me. So I don't have an answer for the exact length right now, because we do need to consider how these properties are being serviced and what we can actually do and take out, or what needs to. We're just like really just looking at it at the bigger picture of the next section of distribution system that is critical infrastructure to replace. I can tell you that our AC pipe policy, which is posted on our website, does have contingency for leaving, as you mentioned, pipe in the ground under certain circumstances, whether it's a safety issue, whether it's cost prohibitive to remove it, et cetera, et cetera. So at this stage of the game, it's just we're just looking at the design and what needs to be completed, because there are a few moving parts to this one section that we need to consider.
But maybe a couple of elements in that policy. The policy, as Alex outlined, differentiates between line on public versus private land. On private land, it needs to be removed. The only time we can leave it on private land is if we don't have a statutory right of way, the landowner insists it to stay there, is informed about the risks to do so, and signs off a legal agreement that waives any future liability for the regional district. So that's the unlikely situation. AC pipe can stay on private land. On public land, typically again, we remove it unless we feel it does not pose a risk, or the economic framework speaks against removing it. An example, if the pipeline is in the middle of Highway 3 and we would need to rip up all the main highway there in order to remove that pipe, that is not reasonable. In that case, if it's under the paved section of a major highway, that pipe stays, because we can safely assume that there's no reason to excavate it in the future. The highway will stay in place. So there's a few exceptions, and then there's an economic threshold. The details of that, I can't remember every detail, but it is something like if it exceeds 50 or 75%, 2/3. If it exceeds the 2/3 of the cost of a new pipe, then we are allowed to leave it as well in place. So when you have a specific difficult circumstances or contracted cost to remove it, then we are allowed to leave it there too. So as part of a tender project, we have our line replacement, and then we typically have an optional cost for asbestos pipe removal. If that cost is excessively high, you may decide to leave it there or leave it there for the time being. But generally speaking, most of your AC pipe is likely going to be removed as part of the project.
So a little bit further context for the group, if I may. The cost of removing asbestos concrete pipe is significant. And so around the table, we've discussed it. The reason that the policy is settled in on, correct me if I'm wrong, Willie, but in the manner that it has, which is to kind of favor it in the probability of removing the pipe as opposed to abandoning it in place, is that we don't have policy from the federal government. So municipalities, and there's a lot of municipalities out there dealing with asbestos concrete pipe. But without a policy from the province specifically on that, it has been the recommendation of this policy to err on the side of removing the pipe, as opposed to taking a chance, leaving it in the ground, and then you have to come back later to remove it. So just a little bit more context around this asbestos concrete pipe, which is significant. Thank you. And correct me if I was wrong there, Uli, please.
No, absolutely correct. Our hope is that over time here, provincially and federally, the recognition comes that this is a major problem and that they shift their focus in regards to their grants more towards this type of issues. In the past, we have done various linear infrastructure replacement grant applications, meaning pipe replacement grants, and none of them was successful because it does not fit the current criteria for grants. It's not considered at this point a high priority in the grants that we have seen in the last 5 years.
I just want to clarify too, it's actually 75%.
75, yeah, I think we changed it a couple of
We
times.
did, yeah, that's why I was
Before it was
stepping into
finalized, so 75%.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's no more questions on the capital side of things, I can give a brief overview of the Crescent Alternative Water Supply Study, a bit of an update. Maybe I'll just kind of start where this project started. So in the 2023 public meeting, I think it was June 21st, we had an Erickson public meeting, and staff presented some challenges related to water supply and drought in the valley. We're going on a year of drought, varying levels of drought in the valley. We've got some issues that we brought up at the time. Of course, the aero treatment plant has limited capacity and water licenses and ability to provide water. Aero creek itself can flow quite low during the hottest months of the year and the months where the demand is highest. And then, of course, you've got the potential environmental and economic losses that occur if you have any upsets in your water supply. So at that meeting, we presented kind of three options for addressing this and kind of rising the challenge. Increasing supply from Arrow Creek. Challenges with that, like I said, Arrow Creek flows quite low in the summer. There are environmental flow needs, is what they're called. The province flags on different watersheds. And those are kind of minimum flows required for aquatic life healthy in those systems. Arrow Creek is also has a fully recorded status with the province, which means that they are very unlikely to, increase volumetric draws with existing licenses or approve any new licenses off that creek. Further to that, the Lower Kootenay Band has also expressed concern with continuing to pull out of Arrow Creek or any of the tributaries to the Goat River system with their initiatives to, bring the Goat River system back to its level of aquatic health that they'd like to see it at. We presented another couple of options as well, the alternate supply. So providing an alternate supply dedicated for irrigation. So that is a intake and a source of water that's separate from the Goat River Arrow systems and a separate distribution system to agricultural customers in the valley. And then we also talked to water demand management, which we are addressing through the Erickson metering project. So two out of these, options really make sense. We've moved forward with both of them. The alternate supply study is, like I said, it's a high-level engineering study looking at the feasibility of, again, providing a new source, seeking a new source, and building a distribution and pumping system to get that water. Very quickly, we realized, just looking at existing water licenses, both approved and not approved in the valley, surface water and groundwater, that there's really only one source that we could reliably focus on, which is Kootenai River. So that's where that landed. Associated Engineering is the lead consultant on the study, and they're undertaking that work. We presented the initial results at a public meeting in November that showed location of a pump station on the Kootenai River, along with the distribution system going through the valley of the Erickson. We've since modified our approach a bit and our routing, just based on some feedback. Now potentially looking at a couple of pump stations and a phased approach to providing water in the valley. Again, this is all high level, conceptual, but really, kind of answering that question, can we do it and would it work? And again, provide some high level costs. So where we're at right now is the AE is drafting a final report, hashing out what this will actually look at, narrowing down the capital and operating costs of a potential system or systems, looking at that phased approach, and also kind of overarching and really driving this is an agricultural needs assessment that AE is undertaking. So you don't have just the engineers looking at the hard infrastructure requirements. You've got their hydrologists looking at water demands both now and in the future, and how crop mixes might change and influence water demands moving forward, and that all feeds back to your design development for a system like this. The project is set to end March 31st, so the end of March. We're expecting a draft final report early February, early mid-February for review. We will review that, of course, presented to the Water Services Committee for their comments and review.
So has there been any consideration of whether the Columbia River Treaty gives an advantage or disadvantage to trying to get water out of that river?
Yeah, what we've seen now and what I've heard from the consultants is that things look good from that perspective. It wouldn't impact us. But again, things are changing, and we're keeping on our toes with that, of course. So if any changes come during the duration of the study, we'll of course include that in the final study.
I have a question.
Yes, Elizabeth.
Don, were you finished? When I went to that meeting in November, and please correct me if I'm wrong with the way I understood the focus of the feasibility study was mostly focused on providing water to the Lister area. And when I asked about the change in the scope of the feasibility study, because initially it came out of this committee when we were the Erickson Water Commission trying to find an alternative source for the farmers in Erickson so they'd have non-potable water and hopefully it'd be less expensive for them. The idea was to get system feasibility study to assess whether we could get water from the Kootenai River for the Erickson area to maintain farming levels that go historical farming levels. So then when I went to that meeting in November, it sounded like you were focused mostly on Lister and having a reservoir there. And I asked the question, is it possible to extend it all the way into Erickson? And there was this concern about the elevation gain and all that. Is that still the case? Like, is it still? Yeah.
Yeah, the consultant has provided, so that's the change that I talked about. So a phased approach with phase one, with a pumping station with Kootenai River, and a distribution system addressing Erickson's needs as a priority. And then a phase 2 looking further south to provide water. But yeah, phase 1 would address that Erickson, those Erickson users.
So that's the change since the November meeting.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. Okay, great. I have
Go ahead.
another question. Since you're talking about water sources, I looked into where the town of Creston, where they get their secondary source of water, and they have 4 different wells. And sometimes they use the water from those wells to help the Erickson system and the town of Creston when there's severe drought, like last year and other years. So why is it that could we have a well and a reservoir in North Erickson, like the town has wells? Like what? I've never heard anybody talk about wells.
Yeah, and you're correct. The town of Creston does rely on 2 wells for a supply. The reliability, based on what we know and what the feedback that we've got from the province, the reliability of a groundwater source to supply what we to supply what we need for the agricultural use that we're talking about, what the scope of the study is likely not there. So that's why they've pointed us to the Kootenay River as your most reliable long-term supply source.
But as far as that's helpful, thank you. And then, but as far as an alternative supply, even for residents, because could it be a supply that augments the residential use, which would take some of the pressure off the agricultural use, like the town of Creston does?
So maybe I take a stab at that. So we are.
So I'm going to step out just for a moment. Uli, I just need to use washroom for a moment. If I could hand this over to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we are actually in close discussions with the town of Creston, generally speaking, into even further tying in their wells into the overall supply. That plays into some of the discussions that we had earlier about filtration needs. The wells can potentially play a role in periods where we have higher turbidity and where the use of the wells may help us in the discussion with interior health in regards to reduced filtration requirements. Part of the discussion is too how the town is being reimbursed for maintaining these wells for their power bills because they exclusively currently use these wells for peak supply, meaning when we are challenged to supply enough water from Arrow Creek to both town of Creston and Erickson, including agricultural sector. So that's when we pick up the phone or send an email and say, hey, please activate your wells in order to augment us so that we can manage the overall supply. I would not throw wells entirely out as a feasible option. I agree with you, they may play a minor role in the overall solution to the overall problem. We are not at that level or detail of study yet, but I personally think there may be something to it. There's other elements of water quality, land availability, any other sources of contamination, how deep are these wells in regards to safety from surface water contamination and. But I think as we get deeper into solutions for the overall supply, wells may play into options for us.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Uli.
So Uli, it's Kelly. My question, if I heard Chris correctly, he was saying that this report is really sitting in with the Water Services Committee group, but it was the Valley Services group that approved to get this alternative water feasibility up and running. My question is, which group is going to be receiving this report? I'll just leave it at that.
In a way, I think both, but we need to be clear that from a financial perspective, this study sits squarely in the A103 service, meaning the overall administrative service. So staff time and whatever associated with this is paid by everyone in the regional district that is part of the water systems. I think it is of general interest because these water supply issues may occur in other areas. I think the study to be presented to both parties, and I think we will likely seek feedback from both areas, and there will likely be more feedback from your side as with the detailed knowledge, more so than the overall directors at the Water Services Committee have. But I think we are obliged to keep Water Service Committee appraised what we are doing in regards to this study and what the outcomes are. And sorry, if I say that, your group is without Area A and Town of Creston, not the total group of interest. Plus, we have rural areas in regards to Lista or whatever, right? So the study affects a fairly large group of people, starting from Windle down to all the way the U.S. border, and we know that we have interested parties that go as far up as electoral area A. So there is actually a larger group of interests, and it is almost easier to maintain that on a Water Service Committee level than at a single committee level. As you know, Area A director has, similar to Area B and C directors, contributed with Community Works to that study because of that shared interest.
Could we then, Uli, attend any of those meetings when you're talking about that study? Just to hear what's going on?
Absolutely. I think this is of enough public interest that we even share it with the general public in form of a public meeting, I would suggest. Again, get feedback on the ultimate results of the study and potential next steps. We will present it at Water Service Committee level, which is a public meeting. And then, like I said, if there's enough interest, we certainly can share that in a set advisory committee environment as well.
Right. So the additional thing I'd like to just throw in there before we can move on. I mean, what we're talking about with this alternative water supply right now is a non-potable system. We haven't, I don't believe we've talked in terms of making it potable. And we also, in the very beginning, talked about this whole area. That is Area A, B, and C. That is Duck Creek, that's Arrow, that's the river. And I didn't attend that open house session with Associated, so I didn't hear as to the scope of the report, and will it be, when it's presented to us, be talking about the greater picture, that is the Duck Creek and the Arrow Creek and so on, because, you know, this is a 10, 15-year project, maybe 5, 10. And if we're going to take a walk down this path, we need to be addressing the whole, and not just the river itself. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my understanding and that's my hope.
I agree. So the direction to our consultants was to seek input from that whole area and speak to water purveyors or any other known stakeholders in the whole area. I agree with you. This is going to be not a 5-year, that's going to be likely a 10 to 20-year time frame to see results, because we will be heavily, simply because of the cost, heavily reliant on senior government grants. So there will be, once we have an outcome, there will be another round of lobbying for grants. Then from there, it likely goes into some stage of more detailed design and more detailed costing, at which we probably have a third round of going out and say, we need grants to make this work. I do not believe that this can be financed neither by the agricultural nor the residential sector or local governments in that area. This problem is bigger and it will require senior government involvement.
Thank you. Chris is still stepped out at the moment, Uli, so I think maybe it'd be a good idea to see if there's any more questions on the alternative water supply and then move on to the Aero Environmental Services 2.4 agenda.
When we were surveyed about it, and I didn't actually get to attend the meeting, in the survey question, we were asked if we were prepared to pay an extra $2,000, something to that effect. And I wasn't clear how that, I guess that's in addition to what we would be paying as Erickson ratepayers.
I don't necessarily remember the detail of that question, and that would be an average. So you certainly would not have that cost being the same for somebody intensely using 20 acres of agricultural land versus somebody with a residential property. So I can't remember, unfortunately, how this question was framed and what the background assumption was for that number.
Yeah, it wasn't clear. It was just asking as a user, so it wasn't clear. It was a very general question.
Yeah, I think the intention was generally, if there is no willingness to contribute to it by the vast majority of stakeholders, that this is pretty well a dead project. We know we need all sides to contribute that, and as I said, including provincial and federal government, but it will come as an additional cost, but I think at the same time will vastly contribute to the long-term economic stability in your region and the development. But yeah, I think it was a bit general level to try to gauge where is. This is computer must have, phone must have unmuted them.
One moment for station identification.
Sorry about that. Can everybody hear us?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Sorry about that. Where are we on the agenda, Uli?
We just more or less, I believe, pretty close to finishing off any questions surrounding the study and where it's going from here. The last question was surrounding the survey question about the willingness to contribute $2,000 to a future solution. And I made a slight attempt to answer that, but couldn't remember all the details behind that survey question.
Yeah, I think the intention of that survey question was just to try to assess the ability or the willingness of users to pay into a dedicated system. And I think Uli had mentioned also at the public meeting, with the infrastructure project at this scale, it would be very unlikely to move forward without, significant grant funding. I think I mentioned it at the beginning of the meeting. We do have an example in Kelowna where they did receive a very large grant to fund a similar initiative. I think they cover a much larger area. It's a much bigger project. It's $360 million. Over I think 3 different phases. This was phase 1 for them, which was $70 or $80 million grant funded. It's about 66% of that phase. So again, it would be looking for something like that, grant funding to make something like this happen. Again, the cost estimates that come out of this will be presented in that final report. As much level of detail as we can provide. Send that to you shortly.
Can we move on to 2.4?
Yes.
Who is presenting on that?
Yeah, well, the environmental.
2.4, Arrow Creek Environmental Services Fee. So I can't even remember when I put this on the agenda what the reason was, but I think it was to explain for people that don't know yet how this came about. The Environmental Services Fee is the general fee for administering your water system. So that includes all the staff that you see in here, including our administrative support, including all the costs associated with it, from office space to phone to vehicles to insurance, you name it. Arrow Creek, on insistence of the town of Creston, does not follow the general calculation of that environmental services fee. So for all other water systems, including Erickson, that is calculated on the basis of percentage of the overall cost based on your operating cost, and a portion is based on your asset management plan cost. The Arrow Creek calculation is actual hours of staff time spent on the service. This is largely the operator hours and the operator supervisors' hours. We calculate and we log and calculate the hours spent on the system. We calculate their overall costs, so not just salary, benefits, and similar costs. We calculate as well from supervisory oversight to insurance to office supplies to office costs, and that creates an hourly rate, almost like a contractor's rate, that we charge Arrow Creek for. So an operator then may be charged out at a cost of, let's say, $85 all in. We log the hours, and at the end of the year, or in the beginning of the next year, this service gets a bill for that amount. We budget typically based on the previous year's cost. So last year we had for 2023, we had a cost of $168,000 in our budget. No, it's not true. $168,000 plus the salary line items. In the end calculation, we had to adjust that by $32,000. So there's a journal entry made for that amount. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is Arrow Creek is the only service where we do an actual cost calculation and charge based on actual hours spent for that service. Questions around that?
Okay, well, there's no questions on that fee. We'll move into just a quick review, depending on what your needs are. for the approved, 5-year financial plan.
Just before we move to that.
Yes.
sorry, Did we want to reintroduce the discussion period?
Yes, why don't we,
See if there's any, based on the reports and the explanations given, perhaps there is a question or two. I mean, what I didn't understand is, didn't realize that this group didn't meet but a year. So yeah, I'm all about, we need to have 2 or 3 meetings because a lot of this time is spent bringing people back up to certain understanding. And it's not a good use of staff time and so on, and it's to their disadvantage. So I didn't recognize that before, but I'm glad to hear that would entertain having more gatherings over the course of the year. So yeah, if there's some more questions, because this group needs to understand, so this is the time.
That's been a back channel conversation we've been having for the last month or so. Anyways, glad to hear that we can effort to make it a more regular opportunity.
Can I suggest that we set a tentative time for, say, November?
Yeah,
It tends to be like, if I go away for the winter, I'm still here in November.
yes,
Otherwise, normally I wouldn't be here in June. So,
It's something before that as well.
I don't know, we used to find, we'd have a meeting in, say, February, and then tentatively set one for May or June, but it was just too early. It was just, people were busy, stuff was going on. So I think at least if we set one for the fall sometime, fall and spring, we've got at least 2.
Right, but November, January is pretty close. I think if we go for, like you say, November, but something before that is fine.
January.
typically we have these in November.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of your typical meeting month. And then,
For once a year. If we're
So
doing it twice a
the
year.
November conversation helps us because we're going right into budget.
yes, yeah,
And January is our only window, basically, January or a small part of February is our only window for budget.
So what I'm suggesting is November and then maybe May. So you're roughly 6 months apart.
Yeah.
Uli, did you have a?
Yeah, we just wanted to make the suggestion that we have late spring, before the summer vacation period, a meeting, because my hope is that we have the completed alternative water supply study to present, and that we have outcomes from our filtration study to present, because there's critical decision making to be done going forward. So I think late spring might be a good time to meet again.
so an April, May date.
May might be better than April.
Okay,
Yeah, early May.
It's a shame that the meeting that was happening in November, that there wasn't clarification sort of just for it. And I wasn't able to attend because I got that message.
That was more of a public,
Yeah.
that was a
more
public meeting.
to explain the study.
The study.
So we are talking about having 2 get-togethers for this committee,
Yes.
May and November. How does that address Kelly's concern about budget? You have an opportunity before my budget's presented.
In regards to this group, the November meeting, if it's late enough in November, we may have a fairly raw version of a draft budget. US directors will see it in a finalized draft version in January, likely. Water Service Committee will see it around that time. These are public meetings that we can invite the members to. But I think we will be challenged to do with all our advisory committees and commissions that we have 2 meetings over the course of the budget season. So if you prefer to see a more finalized draft, it's not final, that's why it's called draft, but a more more to final version draft, then you would have to have your meeting later than November.
Well, I think, certainly, separate that meeting from this committee to, if you're talking an overall meeting, Water Services Committee, as far as budgets. And an invite to this group to participate. That'd be acceptable.
The only problem with that is Water Services Committee, you mean at the board table?
Yes.
Okay, the only problem with that is it's a lot more formal process.
Yeah.
And it may be a disadvantage for this group to try to question in on that, because we move fast.
Right, so what were you thinking when you were?
I think that if Uli is able to give us a good sense in November, what the numbers are looking like, then reviewing it with this committee, you guys can hear your input. And then we just go with that as we work through the budget.
It would be a very broad budget in November. I think we're waiting on a number of items finance that inform the budget, but
So if it works for everybody else, I'm fine with early January. And I'll try and stick around if I know there's a meeting on. But if that works for everybody else, don't just keep it in November just for my sake.
I mean, it varies at times, but this year we are a bit later than normal. We had a change of auditors, so that resulted in a lot of numbers coming to us later than we normally get it to prepare budgets. So what we do typically as a first draft in October was a bit meaningless because we didn't have the appropriate data to really plug in meaningful numbers. So we didn't put a whole lot effort into our October version. Hopefully that is a bit smoother next year. But I think the important piece in these meetings is you will have variations in your operating costs. The important piece in these meetings is talking what was different from previous years. What significant changes did we have? If we had 10 line breaks where we normally have 5 and resulting in contracted services and maintenance cost increase of $50,000, that is something we would want to speak about. If we have outcomes from Arrow Creek costs that were unforeseen, but that's what we, for example, want to talk in May about. Where are we going with our filtration study and what cost can we expect coming out of that? We are typically able to buffer unforeseens. We recently had 2 unforeseens in Arrow Creek. One was our heating system that we intended already to replace, gave totally up on us, and parts availability was practically nil. And we have our backwash tank giving up on us, leaking, and an immediate replacement. But we do build in some budget items that allow us to buffer that. So this is not meaning you see a cost spike, and that's exactly why we do it. So we have this ability within our capital and operating budgets to buffer some of these unforeseens unless it's a catastrophic failure, and then we anyhow would want to immediately report out on that. Otherwise, we want to talk about general strategic approaches that changes cost, i.e., if we want to change our capital plan significantly, if we want to accelerate asbestos pipe replacement because we see our leakage rate doubling, then that is something we would want to discuss and you need to know about and ideally agree to it. If we see, and we do, for example, or try to do when we do asbestos line replacement, try to do some form of assessment of the condition of the pipe that we remove. And if we, I'm just making something up, see that the line was actually in much better condition than we thought, then we would want to talk about that and spread the asbestos pipe replacement over 15 instead of 10 years as what we have planned right now to do. So these strategic changes, I think, is what should be of importance to you. And then the other part is the rate structure over the coming 5 years that we have in our 5-year plan. That's where we need you to be aware what we are proposing, and that's where you need to be ideally in support of what we are proposing. Down the road, I'm assuming we will have more discussion about rates recovery from agricultural versus residential sector. I would anticipate that because from both sides, there's obvious concerns in regards to their current charges and future charges. So that discussion as a larger community needs to happen. But that's the type of discussions I'm hoping to have and expect to have with you. And that can probably be done in November as much as late November as much as it can be in January.
So strategically, November is a good time, and May.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Lee.
Makes sense, yeah.
Are there any more general questions? Margaret, I don't know if you've had all your questions.
Yeah, I was just looking at my notes, but I'm not sure I have any questions at the moment.
Okay. With that, like I said, we'll move on to item 4, which is a review of the board approved financial plan, and then we'll move on to what we are proposing for draft budgets.
So are you proposing to go over some of this, or do you want
If there's
to
any-
launch right into questions?
If there's any questions related to it, that approved budget,
I don't mind if I may. So first of all, the first set of financials that we have, S250, just a comment, much easier, and I believe that is 2023 to 2028. Much easier to read than the 2025 to 2029 financial plan draft. That was a real tough one to read. So I checked a few numbers and saw that they're pretty much in line. So I'm going to stick with, so that people can follow along, the S250 budget. I'm going into expenses first. And I guess I just want to clarify on line item 59,500. And
transfer that
59,510. What does the transfer to other service 59,500 mean again, please?
Yeah, so that would be me again. The operator admin is our operator cost is happening in the following form, or determined in the following form. Our operators, when they work in the field, at the end of the day, they fill out a timesheet that says exactly for which service they did how many hours. We log that. That is directly charged then at the established salary rate and benefit cost to that service. So your crew over there manages Arrow Creek, Erickson, Lister, Sanka, and meanwhile Roundup or Leonel. So they log the hours exactly. So there's full accounting there in that regard. However, when they are in the office, so from staff meeting to doing an operating procedure, to doing reporting for your water system or data review, when they are on vacation, when they have a sick time, when they have a statutory holiday, including some of your on-call time. Most of it is actually allocated to Arrow Creek, but some of your on-call time. All of that is logged as an administrative cost. So that doesn't show up in your salary line item or your benefit line item. Yet we have to charge it back to your system. Some of the administrative costs can be directly allocated to a service, but most of the administrative time is of general nature. Now we need to distribute that out over all of our water services. In your case, this would be over the 5 systems that are run from that crew. So we determine that cost, distribute it out, and because it is now, it lands initially in an allocation service that we call A103, so allocation service is 103. We need to transfer that cost back to the water services. Because of that, it lands in an account that is called transfer to other services. To further distinguish it, we call it transfer to other services, operator admin. So that's the cost that you see when we allocate the time, as I described right now, of our operational staff that is not in the field and not specific to a water system. Now, there's another, as I said earlier, environmental services fee, and I'm speaking now because I just described the operator admin. There was actually a mistake in last year's budget that I made. We had a switch of how this was recorded and allocated, and I made a mistake having an old number of these admin services in my A103 service. And when we did now, we not only have that shortfall from that mistake, obviously I need to account for it in the following year, so it's double what the mistake was. And then that is a result for the higher cost on the line non-operating expenses 59,550, transfer to other services, environmental services fee. So that cost is currently, and I haven't quite finalized that discussion, and there's a couple other cost drivers too, that is higher than you have seen it before, and that is the reason why.
Okay, so to summarize, 59,500 is a reflection of what labor cost is typically. We've seen is fairly consistent as we go from 2023 down to 2028. It's in addition to that, you have your salaries, overtime, and benefits. And that is, and forgive everybody here, this whole, I mean, work in services, yeah, I'm still haven't got a handle on all these services, proven, this sort of thing. So don't expect to. But in addition, with salaries, overtime, and benefits, that's additional to the cost of labor to manage this service S250. But the comment or the question I have is 2023, the salaries were sitting at 37,000 and change, and by 2025, it's over double. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, certainly. So in 2023, we actually had a staff shortage due to unforeseen circumstances. So there was there wasn't what we had anticipated to be spending on operator time for that time period. It didn't go well. It didn't go without repercussions to operations and maintenance that would have been completed that year. So there were deficits as a result of that unforeseen operator time not being available, essentially. And so that is why you see that as a reduced amount. But it did come with repercussions, just so you know. There were maintenance items that weren't completed. A lot was put off until the 2024, that following year, because we just simply were short-staffed.
Great, thank you.
And to add to that, one reason for fluctuations can be as well what's happening out in Arrow Creek. So, as I said, they spent last year more time, more cost in Arrow Creek than they did the previous year, which means there's hours away from other services. So that brings it then down for services like yours. So then they limit projects potentially to the essential line breaks and similar work, or in this case, some meter pit work. But they may not do as much standard maintenance that they do in other years.
All right, thank you. And I will take 2 more questions before I step back to allow others. And I'm going to go to 54030 and 55010. And can you define who are the contracted services are? Fairly consistent across the board. And the repairs and maintenance, is that part of a documented program where those costs are actually relegated to be able to save us money over the long term? So those are my 2 questions, but I will make a comment that our cost of labor and salaries is $750,000 for this service.
So the contracted services portion is, we do have some equipment. We don't have all the equipment. So when we are called to repair a water main and we need to use a hydrovac, or we need to, hire a larger backhoe, that those costs would fall under the contracted services portion. It is also a portion of that is cost recoverable services. So there's not an easy way to break out what is being charged under contracted services that then is recouped through sales of service specified in our income account 42025. What that means is that if a customer requests a new water service, or if they're required to install a meter and a pit per some bylaw requirement, the cost of that work is charged out under contracted services, but then it comes back as revenue through sales of service specified. So I do want to clarify that some of that is cost recoverable services.
And you see that above at 8,562, that's the sale of services specified. So that's the matching revenue for these service work.
Yes, correct. Does that answer your question on
Where is
the?
that?
Pardon me?
Where is that coming back in? What account number?
42025. 42025 under income. The sales of service specified. It's the top section if you're looking at the adopted 2024-2028 financial plan.
The revenue section 42025.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question on the contract services?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and so the repairs and maintenance is just what it is. It is if we have a line break, all the costs associated with the the parts and components to repair that would fall under repairs and maintenance. And part of the maintenance too could be replacing a failed backflow prevention device, or a component of a hydrant or a gate valve. So we replaced 5 of those in 2024. So that would fall under the repairs and maintenance portion of the budget.
So would the asset management plan not foretell some of these things? It's a fairly consistent number across the board. But the asset management plan, does it get that small a detail when it comes to?
It does not. It does not. Typically, the asset management plan is for linear infrastructure, some vertical infrastructure, but that vertical infrastructure, sorry, Chris, I'm speaking on your behalf. The vertical infrastructure components are big ticket items. We wouldn't go down to, say, a $4,000 gate valve item. That's not feasible. It's not
And there's as well financial standards right now. We have dollar limits when our finance department considers something a capital asset replacement. At times we can circumvent that and still draw from reserves, but we don't do it as part of the budget process where we say, well, replacement $5,000 or $4,000 asset management related.
Great, thank you. And I will step back for any more questions to talk up the time. But I will have another one at the end.
Well, I just,
Are there any-
just your comment there, Kelly, when you said it cost $750,000 to run our service, that includes the Arrow Creek system.
No, that does not
No.
include the area.
Well, the service fee comes, the environmental service fee, isn't that to pay for anything that happens at the Arrow Creek? Isn't that the service fee, environmental service fee?
It's a contribution to A103, but it's not doesn't represent the full cost of operating the system.
No, not the whole cost. No, just a percentage. So I just wonder, does that seem like a lot to you, Kelly? $750,000, or what was your impression when you said that?
So maybe we can be specific. So the $1 million that you are referring to, is that at the $1 million at the end of, not sure which line item. Maybe we go to the line item because, so the big, let's start with the two big ticket items that you have, or maybe three or four. You have a contribution to reserve. So that's $600,000 in this proposed budget that goes into reserve, and that then pays for your capital projects. This year you have a capital project overall budget of $1.3 million. So meaning you put $600,000 in reserve, and then you take $1.3 million out of your reserves. So that's the offset that you have there. Then you have the contribution, the transfer to other services under line 59,500 for $697,000. That is direct payment to the Arrow Creek service. So that's matched with a payment from the town of Creston with 700, and I forget the exact number. So that's the two payments that pay for Arrow Creek on an annual basis. Again, about almost half of that is contribution to reserve that then is used to replace items in Arrow Creek. So that's the first two big numbers that total to about $1.3 million. Then you have the environmental services fee that is roughly $200,000 that we just spoke earlier about, and then you have your labor-related cost as probably the next big one. All in is close to $100,000. Does that help?
Yeah, it helps me, but I was just questioning and wondering. Or do you remember what you said, Kelly, about the 750,000? You did a quick calculation, and then I just wondered what you thought about your comment.
Well, what I'd like to do is wrap it up with a question in the end. And what I'm looking at is consistency across the budget area, but noting that the labor, the people portion of this service is $750,000. Then you can see what the totals are. So my qualifying question will come later after I've had an opportunity to others to speak.
Okay, thank you.
So my comment would be that if you add up what's up at the top, 37,000, so it's what, $47,000. That's not very much to run the system. The better question is you add that to $670,000, whatever, yeah. So, and that's a good question. Who knows? I mean, it's an expensive system to run, we know that. So, I guess essentially rely on staff just to kind of give you an idea whether that's efficient or not. Because certainly lay people, we have no idea.
And we're not, as directors, we don't get to open the door and see what's in the toolbox.
Yeah.
This is it. This is where we get a sense as to how to say that.
My
Great job.
apologies.
We're doing.
Yep.
My apologies. I probably should have attached the Arrow Creek budget to this, and Don and Elizabeth probably can confirm that in the past, in most cases, we have done a brief look at Arrow Creek as well. To discuss what the cost looks like. But reality is, so in Arrow Creek, the big numbers, $350,000 a year put into membrane reserves, and then every 5 to 7 years, we take money out to start replacing these membranes, and in the future, potentially a different type of system instead of the current membranes. We put currently $200,000 in general capital reserve to pay for things like I mentioned, the heating system or that tank backwash tank replacement. So that's $550 out of an overall $1.3, $1.4 million. Then you have in Arrow Creek the need for ongoing monitoring, adjustment, service work, and membrane repairs of about 2.5 operators equivalent, between 2 and 2.5 would be my guess. So that full cost sits there as a staffing component. That's significant. You have weekend visits, you have on-call, that's almost entirely paid out of Arrow Creek. You have at any given time during the week, one person up there. We have periods where we have steadily two out there because one person is doing nothing but membrane repairs. Sometimes you have maintenance works that you need two operators there to do that. You have your backwash ponds that need to be cleaned out, you have and monitored, and. So that's the three big components. $550,000 into reserve for the immediate capital needs, not the small stuff, the immediate capital needs, and probably around $250,000, $300,000 staffing component. Now you're sitting at $850 out of the $1.4 million. You have obviously an overhead component, as you have here, that's in the just under, on average, under $200,000 component. And then we are at what did I say, 850, $1,050,000. And the rest is things like utilities. We have significant power and propane costs at that facility, and contracted services on an ongoing basis. You know what, I suggest we send out a similar draft budget that to this group once it's the draft is reviewed by the Arrow Creek Commission, and we make the changes based on that, and then you can have targeted questions in regards to Arrow Creek to us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Does that work?
Thank you.
Okay, so then I will opt in with my final question, and because Willie, you say that there's gonna be some, more information rolling out, my question is gonna be around, other than the contribution to service, and particularly my focus is on the expense, side of the board. Other than the contribution, to, reserves, because that, we have to have that, that's why we're in this problem to begin with. What does it look like to the level of service that you and your staff can provide with a 3% cut on everything else? And that's a question you can't answer right now, but I would like to know what that would mean to affect this level of service with that kind of a cut.
So, to understand your question, you're saying if we artificially lower the staffing component or the overall cost by 3%, I'm not sure which one it is, what impact would that have to this service? Is that the question?
That is.
It would be very similar to some degree to what you're seeing in previous years when Alex spoke about we had to limit our maintenance to the absolute minimum because we had staffing shortages.
I can speak to that as well. One thing I didn't mention is because of the staffing shortages, we actually had to outsource the work that we would have completed in-house to address emergency situations. So that would have been additional contractor time because we didn't have the staff available. So that type of thing, when we have emergencies and we cannot defer that work, it becomes more expensive for the system because we do need to hire those contractors to complete the work. Sorry, Lee, not to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make that point as well.
And I appreciate that, but what I'm asking you to do is sharpen up your pencil, have a look at your operations and see if there's some opportunity, because when we get in front of the large crowd again this year, I don't know if that you were there or not, but I had 300 people who were pissed, and people are tired of just up it by 3, up it by 5, up it by 3 every year. And when I can look at them and say, our group went and they sharpened their pencil, and this is what they told us in terms of how it affects your level of service, I can do that with pride. So all I'm asking you to do is have a look at my question and sharpen your pencil and tell me the truth. That's all I'm asking.
And that's a fair comment, but a couple of responses to this. So first of all, if we don't reduce maintenance and similar things, it's a paper tiger, because what you have right now in the 2025 budget is a surplus of $80,000. And that is in part because there was a budget process that considered some potentials for increases and small buffers in the budget. So if I take the 3% out, I take these buffers out, and what actual cost is actual cost, and that $80,000 may now be, instead of an $80,000 surplus, a $40,000 deficit. That has achieved nothing, but it satisfied the 3% reduction. If we are serious about reducing costs, then we need to talk about response times, and this is not without talking to the larger group, because this existing staff is servicing 5 systems, and I cannot just, because one side decides saying, oh, I load Roundel and Lister up with an added operator cost. At some point you get to that point that you say, okay, I need to redistribute the operator cost, and if I can't, then I have to say a full-time operator in the future is only a 0.7 operator. Now you have a qualified water operator that we spend money to train that person, that are sought after in the region, or not just in the region, province-wide, that may say, I'm sorry, but on 0.7 of full-time equivalent, so meaning at 30 hours a week or 28 hours a week, I cannot survive. I need another job, or I need to go entirely to a different job. So we have a contingent of operators that we somehow need to accommodate. Or we say, oh, we just have the absolute minimum, and if the so-called so-and-so hits the fan, we don't have the critical mass. We need to rely, and hopefully a contractor is willing, because they are not on call, a contractor is willing to come in and help us out when we have critical infrastructure failing, line breaks, somebody driving over a hydrant, or whatever else it is. So it is a matter of saying what kind of level of service do we want, and that's not something snap of the finger in 1 year. This is a bit longer-term strategy in regards to staffing availability to provide a certain level of service. Because overall, the materials cost are fixed. The tools cost are more or less fixed. That's not
So
something you can work on.
That you are operating as lean and efficient as you can, is what I'm hearing you say. And I like hearing that, but I also I invite the others to opt in if they like. And
Let me, can I interpret that a bit different? You have at the current staffing level periods where you have a staff overhang. That is naturally that way. You have the operator main working periods is the period from April to November or something thereabout, right? That's when you can dig, that's when you can do work with water without causing damages and. So yes, in the winter we have probably somewhat more operators than we need to. We try to accomplish that by pushing as much as we can, for example, membrane repairs in Arrow Creek to that winter period. So we try to be as efficient as we can, but there's a seasonality to the operator time, just like it is in agriculture. You can't plant your trees in the winter period. You have to do that seasonally, and there's a portion of that plays into this as well.
thanks, Uli.
Any more questions on this item?
I understand that a lot of contractors would say, okay, I'm in a meeting and therefore I need to be paid, or I'm in the office, I need to be paid. And that's what you're saying, the 59,500 line was for when they are not actually on the job site, they're doing other things, and then that is being charged to admin and then goes out to the different water services. Is it, I don't know, when I used to work, there's a different company that I worked at, and you're paid a different amount whether you're in the field or if you were in a meeting or if you're in an office. There was a different salary level or payment level. Is that not what happens here? Like if they're being paid, like you were at one point, you said $85 an hour, including everything. Does that mean if they're in a meeting for over 2 hours, they're charging out over $170? I think that's what Kelly was saying. You sharpen your pencils. It's different manners of doing things. I'm not saying to cut having these people, but just say, hey, when you're in a meeting, we don't expect that you're going to be charging $170 for a 2-hour meeting. It seems a little excessive.
I don't think it's worthwhile for us to go to that level of detail. If you deal with contractors, you know, they charge you. If they're working for you and they're sitting around, no matter what they do, you're paid. And typically it's going to be more than $85 an hour. It's going to be $150 or something for a big bowlers. I don't think as a committee it works for us to push these guys to that level of detail. We know that and contractors are hard to get. We know that as they deal with this stuff, they just do the best they can. Sometimes it won't be the best that they could have done, but you hope that they do that.
And quite frankly, we have local contractors that we are lucky to have, that when we have that line break and we call them, that in most cases, they are there within a couple of hours. Otherwise, you need staff that goes out and sits on the backhoe at the same time as they put up traffic controls, at the same time as they notify the public about an outage, at the same time as they put pumps in the hole to pump out the water, and. So we have already the lucky situation that we have some contractors that we work on a regular basis with that really respond very quickly to that. But most emergencies are not a one or a two, but a three-man job in order to do it effectively. At the same time, we have as well the expectation that customers that suffer an outage or have non-potable water are being notified in a reasonable time. And that's all good when it happens between Monday and Friday and between 8 o'clock and 4:30. But if that happens on Saturday night, you just don't have the support from the office staff, and then we are paying, and that's part of the overall consideration, we are paying for a 24/7 on-call system. That's cost that's happening in the background, and that's contributing to the overall cost that you have. That's a service level that we can discuss. I would never recommend to do that and do away with an on-call system, let alone from the compliance side and the catastrophic failures that you could get from something like that. But we need to see what we want from our system. If we want to behave like a system that is run by 5 volunteers and services 50 residents, we can discuss doing so. I don't think that the rest of the board will be too pleased about that approach, but that's the distinguishing factor when you talk about a cost that we have here. We have certified, experienced operators that know the system, that know the compliance pieces, that know the risks that are involved in whatever they are doing, that we have a mature health and safety system behind this, we have operating procedures. All of that comes at a cost, and that's the standard, quite frankly, that we as a regional district have established, which contributes as well to our health and safety record.
So, to me, when you're dealing with unhappy, whether I'm dealing with other unhappy orchardists or you're dealing with unhappy ratepayers, and to me, you look at the broad picture. The broad picture is, we're dealing, as Margot said, with a whole bunch of hardware that needs to be maintained and updated. We're dealing with an expensive water treatment system that needs to be run, and we don't, in a sense, we don't have a lot of choice as to what, if we want to improve or maintain the system, replace it properly, we've got to pay more money. And on the other side, we're asking you guys to look at ways, for example, the alternative water system, of reducing costs. And the wonderful thing about that is that it gets less water running through that plant. I'm glad to hear that you're looking at other ways, like a different filtration system, because that's the other way to do it. It doesn't solve our supply problems, but it does supply the cost, maybe, but in the long term would make a difference in cost.
Yeah.
So I think they're doing what they can long term to reduce costs. They're trying to be as efficient as possible. They're, in a sense, they're mandated to look forward and say, we have to do this with a plan. The plan is going to cost us more money.
Again, from a from an asset manager perspective, we will recommend the lowest cost option, the life cycle of whatever infrastructure we're talking about, whether it's, the advanced treatment system and a treatment plant and a few different options there. We're going to look.
Do I like it that I'm gonna be paying 1,500 plus as a household here in 29? And 500 an acre for agriculture? No. But I don't. My alternative is to not have any water. And that's not a very good alternative. And I think water systems in a lot of places, and especially in industrialized countries, are looking at these much higher costs.
Yeah, we're not water service
Cost materials.
Yeah, and we've still got a large backlog of linear upgrades, replacements to do. We're not on top of our asset management replacements. We're doing much better than we were before. We still have a backlog of things that should be replaced still many years ago. So.
Dealing with the problem you inherited.
It is a problem that we inherited. I think you guys are all pretty aware of the history of the system, how we got to this point. So we are, I think, the best decisions on present the best options to the board to best direction of manage the system. If there's no further questions on the board approved financial plan, we can move on to our draft 2025-29 financial plan. Sort of a minuscule font here. Let's see if you.
That's the one, sorry for me.
Yeah. So for 2025, I'll just start right up at the top. We are looking at 5% increase in metered rates for 2025, with subsequent years out to 2029 with a 6% increase in rates. Yeah, so it is lower than you've seen in previous years, 15%. Drafting this budget, provided us reserves to match our needs for the system.
Chris, can I jump in here just for a quick second? I just, a point of clarification. The metered rates are those of people or properties who have volunteered
Yes.
to be on a metered rate. This is not reflective of the phase one metering project, because we will not be implementing metered rates of this type within that project. The project is for data collection and leak detection and conservation efforts. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification. These are voluntary properties that have this meter rate applied.
Right.
Yeah, and they volunteered because it significantly reduced their rates.
There's recouped, that's a long conversation. There are base charges that are applied. It's not just a volumetric charge. There is a quarterly base charge applied that they pay, and they still do pay the agricultural irrigation privilege charge and the CRFC, which is the contribution to reserves. So it looks like it's a significantly reduced rate, but they are paying other rates on top of that volumetric charge, just to be clear.
So, yeah, again, as Alex said, we moved down to that agricultural land charge, which provides a large source of revenue for us. Again, that's 6%, 5%, 6% forward. You're going to move down to the operating expenses and some of our assumptions moving forward. For 2025, we applied a 1% increase in salaries. That 1% is a result of considering both inflationary increase, but our human resources department also took an industry scan, as they do, I think, every 2 to 3 years, looking at comparable employers and comparable positions and seeing where our salaries align with them and align again. So with this latest industry scan, they recommended that their salaries were above our comparators, so that's why you see a 1% increase for 5 to be reflective of that where their salaries.
So-
For me, there was an increase in 2024, and then for 2025, this year they have undertaken that study and realigned that increase this year, which is less than inflation.
So that everybody understands, the policy is CPI index as a standard. But RDCK also every couple, 3 years, as Chris said, takes a look at industry and finds out where the level of the employees within RDCK sit compared to industry, both private and public. And it's determined that in that, it was described to us as like a pyramid, but it's not really a pyramid. But it's determined that sometimes a layer of employees are doing well, some are not doing so well, some are doing well. So they make that adjustment every 3 years based on that. So typically your CPI, which is sitting around a little bit more than 3% right now, maybe closer to 4%, because of that internal view or look, it's determined that, as Chris pointed out, it's for the adjustment, it's now 1% to get back into where industry is. So it's a very good policy. Yep, it is. It's so that salaries don't get out of control.
And this 1% applies to the salaries of my employees. Other employees are various spots, but most employees will get that 1% increase again, less than CPI. So that's the assumption moving forward for salaries. In subsequent years, so 2026, we applied a 2.7% increase to the items under all the operating expenses here, and then 2% for the subsequent years. Again, projections on for that inflationary increase incentives, but assumptions.
What are those reviewed as you go forward?
Thanks, Don.
When are they reviewed?
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you. Of course, yeah.
Like those that are being dropped, may not.
Yeah.
Annually, you take a look at that.
Oh, yeah, I mean, at the end of the year, right, we come back, recommended, 5-year budget, annually, so look at it. So this is what we present to you, at the beginning of budget delivery, things like that, and to challenge us for efficiencies you can provide input on direction forward strategic. Moving down to capital expenses, Alex gave you a really comprehensive overview of some capital works that we have in the queue. And looking forward, if there's any other questions on the capital plan, you got to look forward. And then we end up on the non-operating expenses. Again, we spent a bit of time on this looking at the approved financial plan, and the answers to a number of questions here regarding transfers to other services and reserve. The item highlighted in yellow here is highlighted in yellow, because it our number crunch for the Arrow Creek system, so these numbers are full. And, these are preliminary numbers at this point, to be further refined, but it's our best assumption right now presented in budget that's in front of you.
Sorry, was there a question I asked? The audio is sometimes a bit difficult.
No, no questions so far. We're kind of at the end of the budget here. I think we answered a lot of the questions throughout the meeting, Uli. Yeah, we're at the bottom. Again, you can see the contribution to reserve for the service. Again, looking to build out those reserves to keep the system forward.
So I think one of the discussions we could or should have is what we are showing right now is the overall projected increases. So we have shown for this year 5% increase in rates, 6 years in following years. Last year's budget was reversed. It showed 6 for that for 2025, I believe, and then 5 going forward. I'm happy to discuss the approach here. This is based on the assumption that we want to be staying, hopefully, ahead of any kind of pipe deterioration and replace pipe at that level of about $700,000-800,000 a year annually. But happy to discuss that approach a bit more. As one of the bigger ticket items and bigger strategic approaches.
You have a question? Oh.
So I will update while people are thinking it through, and thank Lee, Chris, and Alex for the work that they put into this. And I'm not going to cut. Lee, I wouldn't know you well enough that I don't need to apologize, but when I hit you hard with that question, I really took a lot from what Margot and Matilda said in the beginning, and it was a question around the cost and how are we going to be able to control these things and why are we here and that sort of thing. Your group has done a good job of putting that together, and I think through that line of questioning and going through this budget and asking you that hard question. I did it for a reason, 3%, what does it mean? Well, Don actually answered it very nicely as well, Uli. And it is what it is for us to maintain what we have. I feel confident that this group will find savings wherever they can, because that's always a moving target. If the grants become available, they're going to grab them. But at the same time, it's a plan that moves us forward. And, I threw out the words, are you lean and efficient? And I'm comfortable with working with Uli's group that they're always looking at ways of finding savings. But more importantly, it's this group here that needs to hear that.
And I want to be clear too, if I can. One of the advantages acting as an advisory committee, not as a formal commission, is that we can have that informal discussion and not have to mince our words the same way. I appreciate frank and open and challenging questions. That needs to be part of that. No different than I would expect it, as long as that's overall respectful, no different than I would expect that in a public meeting. I think that's the intent of sitting here together with you, to challenge us to have these frank questions, and Dawn and Elizabeth have the advantage of having been in these meetings for years, and we had some of these discussions previously. But I don't mind having challenging questions as long as they are respectful, and they were. I'd gladly answer it, but it is important for you to understand the context. Otherwise, you can't be a conduit for us, and that's both for directors and committee members. A conduit for us to talk to the general public. If you don't understand and agree with our approaches, it's pretty hard to stand out there and have that discussion with them. So no offense taken whatsoever. I think we need to have that type of discussions and level of discussion.
Yeah, further to that, I mean, having 2 of these meetings a year, I mean, much better for everybody staying on top of the issues and the challenges and the opportunities in this area. Thank you.
But returning back to the rate increases shown, because I think that should be of public interest and discussions, right? This isn't just adopting 2025. We are adopting a 2025 5-year plan with a strategic approach over the next 4 years as well. Are we comfortable with what you're proposing here? That approach will lead us to a contribution level in the $1 million per year level if all our assumptions are correct. Yes, that includes as well some assumptions around 2% inflation rate and that. But what's the group's opinion around this approach of reserve contributions, and with that the capital replacement approach?
I'll speak a little towards it. I don't know that the general community is prepared because there has been relatively little information or discussion bringing everyone to the same place that we've come to today. We did have that big public meeting, but I'm not sure many people really understood the impact of that. That was the place where I finally understood what all this increase was about, and it was, it's taken me a while to get my head around it. And because I'm in this committee, it's easier for me to have questions and put them to you and get some answers. But this kind of discussion hasn't happened with the general community to the point where I think there's just a non-understanding of why all this is happening. Even though we've gone through some of the history, there's new people that have come in. It's going to take some educating, I think. And I'm not sure how to approach that, but I think that we need to have more ongoing discussions. I'm not saying the administration of the RDCK has to do that, but somehow we have to come to that so that we can help one another come to terms with what we're facing.
I think part of that is the Erickson Community Association of being present and talking and saying what we're hearing here.
Yeah.
And well, we have a lot of limitations with those meetings because we don't even have a place to meet.
That's right. We're facing that problem right now. I'm part of that association, and we were just told that I think we were trying to have a social in the gymnasium of the Erickson school, and we were told that was not to be done again.
Yeah, because the Erickson Community School is not open to the Erickson community.
So you're not allowed to have, they're not renting it to you. Holy smokes, I haven't done.
It's like, what are we supposed to know?
Well, the library is always free, and you're a member. I don't know how large your group is. The high school has the auditorium there that we, as RDCK, we contribute to subsidize groups that want to perform or participate in there. Yeah. I think before too long, we can probably find something that makes sense. That's cost effective. Wendell Hall
I think that they were generally trying to flex significant areas.
How big is the roof?
Last time there was what, 30 people?
It varies. Yeah, it varies depending on the subject, but if we put water forward, I imagine it could be a large group.
I think so.
But to your point, and Margot's, being able to get that group together and chat through this thing through, would be extremely beneficial, for sure. And I'm sure Roger will really show up.
Oh, well, Roger's been at it.
Yeah, then, and yes,
I
it's nice
think-
to have. Sorry,
Yes,
my part.
Sorry, I was just thinking of, the last meeting that we had. It's not hard to pull people into a meeting when we say, let's talk about water again. It's having the kind of information and the kind of response that will make sense for it.
Right.
I think it's a difficult one to come to terms with because I think a lot of people were caught off guard and caught in a historic bind and not knowing. And I can understand where Don Lowe has come through this, and I was around at the time when we had those incredibly low rates, and that was wonderful, and really not understanding the implication of it for the future. And understanding where we are now, it's like like having. I'm trying to think of an analogy within the family. It's almost like having something burst forth that you thought you were prepared for, and it's not there now. You have to start all over to get ready for what's coming next.
Well, and there's a bigger dynamic coming down the road, which is a lot of the farmers in Erickson are aging out.
Yes.
I'm hearing a number of people, including yourself, Margaret, Dave White, there are a number of people who are saying, I'm at the end of my, I'm looking at retiring, and I can't afford to pay $10,000 for water to stay on my property. There's no one coming down the pipe who's going to buy this property off me, other than an industrial agricultural group, maybe offshore, which appears to be happening somewhat. It's how are the people who aren't going to be producing like they used to produce able to afford to stay on their property? And if the answer is sell your property, go find somewhere else to live, who's going to buy it?
Correct.
To maintain its water system rates. However, that's probably getting off track a bit.
Not quite, because that's it's a current history, because now we know BC Tree Fruits declared bankruptcy. So now it expands into a larger picture again. And I don't know what that's going to do to the industry, but it certainly has caused a lot of distress, and I'm not sure how that's going to play out.
Yeah, if all of a sudden there's a lot of properties for sale, how is it going to affect the maintenance of the water system rates, et cetera? But
What'd be interesting is, okay, so, the cost of doing business is the cost of doing business, and we're talking about water. Water there's a cost to it. So you got to build it into your business plan. And then you have to figure out ways of adjusting your business plan so that it still becomes viable. So that's an exercise you do. If you take that same and apply it anywhere that you go, pick a geographical area, you have to run through the numbers the same way. In my mind, what I'm interested in knowing is what is Kelowna's and the Valley and even try to compare apples to apples. There's not too many that are fruit producing, soft fruit producing, but you can take a quick look, snapshot, to find out what their water costs are. and so that you can determine whether or not you're competitive or not. It's part of building that business plan. That's not that difficult to do.
And further to that, that's something that I've looked into, kind of beginning of that agricultural water study. And I think my predecessor, Jason, also looked into some of that as well, rates. So certainly come back with the water services committee and something to but yeah, it's a question that I ask myself.
It's a relevant perspective in this conversation.
For a water purveyor, have we?
So I have a question.
So, and it's, sorry, go ahead.
When you say like has to be working with the boss, that's the feedback I'm getting from talking with people in the community out there. Is that as the farmers, you're making money off the water. That's it. As a residential owner, you're not. You're using the water and you are just paying over. Where the farmer does have that potential to adjust his cost of his product at the end. We're residentials. So, and that's kind of where it's going to be with most people that I've talked to.
So,
Farmer using it to grow crops, make money. Then there's this person that's just living residential as it.
Happens to sit on an acre of land and all of a sudden their bank is $1,200 a year for water, and they're going, this is their neighbors. I do 2 loads of laundry. Yeah.
so we live in an agricultural land freeze as well, and we're limited with what we can do with our land. I mean, some people in the past would have subdivided and said, okay, fine, I'll make more money just selling the land. I never wanted to do it that way, but when it gets to a point where it costs you your entire income just to maintain, then you start rethinking it. It's you're living on pension and you're living with your pension going out towards all those expenses, makes it pretty tough. So, I mean, those are not things we can answer right away. And I have faith that there are some other possibilities coming down the line. I don't know what yet, but I still want to believe that it's not over till it's over. So I'm willing to work towards educating our community in what the water issues are. I don't have an answer for farming right now. Because I don't even know who's going to supply us with what we need to use for our next year. I left town at the time when BC Tree Fruits was collapsing everything, and not quite sure who's going to pick it up. They were saying somebody should pick it up, but I don't know what's happened. So that's all up in the air. In the meantime, though, I have you, Tilly, and I have you, Roger, and possibly you, Kelly, to help with a possible session of helping Erickson community understand what's coming through these rate increases. I think most people are just irritated by it, not understanding it.
Well, can I throw something out? This is a great discussion, and I follow that with a lot of interest and sympathy. Can we try to translate that, what the best steps are in regards or in context of this budget? So we are showing a 5.666% increase to this. This is based on a reasonably aggressive line replacement, cash financed. So what kind of options do we have? And Don is well aware, we had over the last 10, 15 years often that discussion. Where does it or does it not make sense to consider borrowed money for infrastructure replacement? And if we go 2 years back, we were often challenged and had the discussion about why would we not let future generations pay, borrow money for this, and interest rate is somewhere at 2.5%, 3%, and why would we not take advantage of that? The other side of the coin is we have had recent spikes. It's coming down now again, but recent spikes going up to 7.5% borrowing, and all of a sudden the picture looks very different. And most of us here in the room are all old enough to remember times when interest rates were 14% or something like that, and when you had a significant loan, it hurt. It brought you at the brink of financial non-sustainability. So that's what some of our considerations are here when we talk about increasing rates going forward and options for financial management of these things. Thoughts around that?
Would there be a way to, I mean, I like the way you're saying to summarize it so that we can all basically be speaking off the same song sheet. Because yes, we do need to speak to the community. Would there be a way of having some kind of, just a quick flyer saying these are the upcoming rates, increased rates, but this is, without going into all the detail that there is here, but just saying that this is what you're going to get as a result of that.
Summarize the highlights.
Yeah, yes, speaking points.
Yeah, something that,
Earbuds to sit with people.
a postcard size, something that we can talk
Definitely.
to, that would think that would be.
I don't know if you're getting it all on a postcard.
No, that's something that I definitely work on.
That'd be great.
Yeah. 'Cause I'm
And I can say this, Elizabeth, when I was speaking to a business person here in Creston and some other people from Erickson, they said it would be really helpful to have an educational sheet that you're talking about, because I know that you've mentioned all these same items over the last 5 years or 6 years I've been on this committee. But when we only have a meeting once a year, it's hard for me to remember everything. So it would be very useful. I agree with, I don't know. Yeah, to have that information sheet.
Speaking notes that help you to speak to these topics, summarizing more or less most of the items that we discussed today. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And a lot of things that not everybody's aware of, like we have a 24/7 service. A lot of people, I'm sure, aren't aware of that.
It's on the billing search. It's on the billing search.
Sounds like you're cutting a YouTube video. You laugh.
No, I'm
That is the most effective way of delivering
It's a
messages.
TikTok video.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's good to meet you. By the way.
Yeah. And the town of Creston has a report, and I read their report about their water system, and it really helped. So it's available.
So their annual report. They have an
Yeah,
annual,
maybe-
they also do have an annual report. A little more than a postcard, but
Oh, yeah, more than a postcard. Yeah, the postcard wouldn't be enough.
no, but yeah, I know, I hear you. Something
But I-
easily digestible.
I don't
and-
need something that's-
Something that sticks with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So can I just jump in here for a second? We do send out rate driver letters at a threshold. We do send out billing inserts with the annual bills that do describe the system. Perhaps we could also include this year in the billing insert comment to, if you'd like to know more about the Erickson water system, please go to our website to the Erickson water system page, where you will find the annual report. That's fairly extensive. It does describe the system really quite well. And we're constantly working on improving the website to deliver pertinent information to the customers, so they do see that we aren't just sitting on our hands. We're making every effort to improve the system as best as we can. So if there's any suggestions on that front, what we can include on the webpage or the billing insert, certainly we're happy to hear that as well, because, you know, that is one conduit that we have to the community where we can deliver information is a website. And I know not everyone likes using website, but billing insert, that's a hard copy people can look at. So, I mean.
And billing inserts, unfortunately, is always limited to that 1 or half page information, right?
Yeah, it's an 8.5 by 11.
Yes, I think having the link there to a website page that's in more detail discussing the items that we have here is likely a very suitable tool, I agree.
So perhaps maybe I'll make note of that, and Chris and his team is sort of takes lead on that project of information sharing through the billing insert and website. That's something we can work on improving, is, you know, providing a little bit more information. As you said, just reference, here's the link to the website, and it includes an annual report where you can read through 10 pages of thrilling information about your water system.
I'm just,
So my question would, sorry, Margot, my question would be on the annual report. Does it talk about the past and where we and how we got to here by chance?
It does have, like, both on the Erickson water system front page of the website, it talks about the historical, the history, of the water system and how we got here, about, you know, the various issues that you all know about. But also, I think there is a preamble in the annual report that speaks to it a little bit. But certainly on the main homepage of the Erickson water system, it does detail the history of the system.
oops, are we getting cut out?
No, I'm just showing that page that Alice.
Oh, there you go. I see it.
And it's
What I was
I
going to
believe-
say is that I'm thinking in terms of what happens to the brain when you get distressed and you don't take all that information in. And what I think what people need to understand is what you've explained about what you are doing now about, say, the filter system, which is a big piece, and getting that alternate supply and doing the metering. And I think some of the things that can address how we got here, but what we're doing about it now.
And not that it necessarily makes you feel better, but reality is this is not isolated. And we have water systems, for example, that have their whole entire distribution system being a C pipe and needing a replacement. With these systems, we are talking about trajectory towards the well over $3,000 a year residential rate, without the irrigation or agricultural component, right? So there's definitely systems that have an even worse situation, and we have to have that same discussion with them. What are the rate drivers? What has happened before, and where are we? So yeah, this is not isolated to your system.
No, I just keep thinking in terms of a doctor's appointment where you suddenly get the bad news and you can't take it all in. And you need somebody there to help you and guide you through what it is you're doing now.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have made a very good point, though, that we should describe how we got here, because the reality is that how we got here is that the funds weren't set aside for distribution system replacement historically. So that's something that, like, potentially the general public doesn't understand or doesn't know of. So that is something we could flesh out a little bit more. The website is also being updated, so this kind of structure is going to change. It's going to be a lot more user-friendly. We've been working years on it, so stay tuned for that as well. It'll happen within the next month. But that's a very good point.
No, we are.
You're getting
At least
close.
we are. Yeah.
Getting close to the finally. I've been in here, going on 3 years now? We have. You've been promised a website update.
You know, we're so lucky to have the water we have. There is issues, extreme issues, across the province, across the country. And if, the country to the south of us starts expecting they can start drawing water from Canada, I mean, it's a battle. And, I think we're in pretty good hands from what I've heard today. We need to pay what it costs to keep our system operating efficiently. And, the value of water is climbing exponentially across the globe.
So to that point, we just returned Christmas and New Year's. We drove to Arizona, spent time there, and drove back. And when you hit Utah and Arizona, the first thing that came to our mind is, where are these people getting their water from? We could not get past how dry and where's the water coming from? And they have huge dairy farms and huge cotton hay fields, and we're just like beside ourselves thinking, water. And so, yeah, it really brings to home the importance of, we do have a resource here that is convenient for us. We need to appreciate it, but we can't squander it.
Yeah.
I just spoke with somebody here in Denver, and he was telling me he'd bought a property where they have glacial water. And he said when that was first set up, it cost them $22,000 to hook into it. But now it costs $100 and something thousand to hook into it.
Whoa.
So, and I said, is that with filters? No, it's not quite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to continue our effort to meet with our community, and I think in person helps. And so I'm going to continue to connect with you, Roger, and with you, Tilly, and see if there's some way we can make it a friendly face.
I'm gonna try to get, I have some meetings with the school board and I'll bring up the whole Erickson school deal.
Okay.
I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Everybody.
Yeah, I need to,
You just connect from there, or do you have to do it from here?